Hi, Arcfield Weather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Tuesday morning, August the 19th. We'll certainly focus in on the tropical scene, a very active tropical scene in the Atlantic Basin. We, of course, have Hurricane Erin, which is now classified as a Category 3 major hurricane and has weakened some during the past 24 hours. The latest observation has its maximum sustained winds at 115 miles per hour. It has weakened some as it encountered some wind shear during the past 12 or 24 hours or so. There are a couple other tropical systems on its heels, and we'll talk about those as well over the next few minutes here. Wanted to first take a quick look at the temperature anomaly forecast map from last night's run of the GFS for basically the last week to 10 days or so of August. This actually runs from August 22nd to September 1st. And as is often the case with hurricane system this time of the year, once they pass on by to the north and east of the eastern U.S., they often result in an influx of colder than normal air. And this is, in fact, the forecast for the 22nd of August to the 1st of September, and the eastern two-thirds of the nation largely well below normal for that stretch. And August has really been quite a nice month across much of the Middle Atlantic region, Northeast U.S. Philly, for example, slightly below normal temperatures up to now for the month of August. Certainly with this in the forecast, it looks like August will end up below normal throughout much of the Middle Atlantic region, Northeast U.S. And again, this is the expectation for the 22nd, which is late this week, after Erin passes on by to the north and east, out into the open waters of the North Atlantic. Looks like quite a cool stretch. The exception, far to the west here, out across the Pacific Northwest, western part of Canada, it looks like warmer than normal conditions to close out the month of August. Well, let's now focus in on the tropical scene. That map, by the way, of the 2-meter temperature anomalies provided by Weather Bell Analytics. Here's the latest forecast tracked by NOAA's National Hurricane Center. The center itself is off to the north and east of the island chain here, and it has begun that curve we've been talking about for many days now by taking a turn to the northwest. It will continue on a northwesterly track over the next, let's say, 12 to 24 hours or so, then turn to the north at midweek on Wednesday, and then by Thursday it'll start to accelerate off to the north and east out into the open waters of the North Atlantic by the time we get to the middle part of the upcoming weekend. It is kind of typical for a tropical system to start to accelerate once it reaches those higher and higher latitudes. It kind of gets more and more influenced by the westerlies up in those higher latitudes, so it's not surprising that it'll be a slow mover, then a moderate speed, and then accelerate by the time we get to Thursday and Friday of this week to the north and east. Now, in terms of intensity, kind of a difficult forecast for the next couple of days here. Again, is a Category 3 system this morning, basically a weak Category 3 at 115 mile per hour maximum sustained winds. On the positive side, that shear that has helped to weaken it during the past 12 to 24 hours will tend to relax over the next 12 to 24 hours. That should make atmospheric conditions more favorable for intensification. On the negative side for intensification, it is such a slow mover now. It is only moving at 7 miles per hour to the northwest this morning that oftentimes that tends to cause upwelling, churning of the waters underneath its circulation center. That in turn brings colder water from deep down to the surface, which is a negative factor for intensification. Bottom line, probably a fluctuation over the next 24 to 36 hours or so, maybe between Category 2, Category 3, maybe even back to a Category 4 at some point. But again, the most important factor here is that indeed it does make that curve away from the East Coast over the next 24 to 72 hours or so. Now, in terms of impact, it comes close enough to the Outer Banks that they can certainly experience tropical force tropical storm force winds, maybe even an outside chance of hurricane force winds across the Outer Banks. They began evacuations yesterday in probably the most vulnerable areas, Hatteras Island and Ocracoke Island. Ocracoke Island was last really damaged by a hurricane back in 2019 by Hurricane Dorian, which, as you may recall, kind of skirted the Outer Banks. Whether those evacuations creep up the Outer Banks today, let's say all the way up to Duck or even farther north than there, that could very well happen. We'll see what they do here, but they started in the southernmost part of the Outer Banks yesterday. And indeed, with those strong winds, you have rip currents for sure along the Outer Banks, and that threat of rip currents will be high all along the East Coast over the next couple of days. Rough surf, high waves, you name it, as a result of strong onshore flow, strong winds. Yesterday, I read a report this morning that yesterday they had to rescue some 60 swimmers off of the Carolina coastline, Wrightsville Beach, and with those rip currents already, kind of life-threatening rip currents, certainly down by the Outer Banks, and looks like, again, that threat will extend all the way up to the New England coastline over the next few days. We actually have a steady flow of onshore air right now across the middle and northeast U.S. with a large high up to the north, and that just increases that time period for an onshore flow, which raises the chances of high waves, raises the chances of beach erosion and coastal flooding. But watch out in the Outer Banks. There may be more evacuations coming, and certainly, even though the system itself, Erin itself, is well offshore, there will be certainly some damage done to the Outer Banks over the next 24 to 36 hours or so. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that there are indeed other systems that we'll have to monitor over the next week or two. Erin is located right here, again, a Cat 3 system right now. It is turning to the north and west. We'll turn to the north and then race off to the north and east by the latter part of this week. Meanwhile, a second wave right now is kind of encountering some dry air, some Sahara dust air. We'll take a look at that in a moment, as did Erin for a few days, and that kind of acted as a cap once it escaped that dry air and moved over the very warm waters right here over the southwestern Atlantic. It exploded in its intensity from a tropical storm all the way to Cat 5 in a short period of time. There's a very impressive wave also that just exited the west coast of Africa. This may be a system to deal with in the eastern or southern U.S. next week, and this beyond that, maybe 10 days to 2 weeks out for these couple of systems. Again, we're now kind of in that peak Atlantic Basin tropical season, which I've always maintained was the second half of August and then throughout the month of September. And of course, climatology shows that as well. The reason the peak of the tropical season tends to be early to mid-September is that the sea surface temperature pattern kind of reaches its highest of temperatures in this part of the Atlantic Basin, right in this area right here, during the latter stages of August and into the early to mid part of September. With those very warm waters, you get your peak of tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin by the early middle part of September. Now let's take a look at a couple of plots here from the University of Wisconsin tropical website known as CIMSS, a very good website for tropical information. Just do a search on CIMSS. Right now we have Erin, and notice it is a little bit larger. This also is typical of hurricanes as they move to higher and higher latitudes. Oftentimes they will kind of broaden out in size, even while they're undergoing some weakening. In other words, that wind field that maybe kind of wrapped around that circulation center initially tends to spread out as the system itself tends to broaden in size. And that is one of the reasons why the Outer Banks right here can very well be impacted by strong tropical storm force winds or even some hurricane force winds, because that wind field around Erin will broaden out, and even though the system itself stays well offshore of the Outer Banks, there can be some very strong winds out in to the northwest side of the circulation center. Meanwhile, another system right here we saw a little bit ragged this morning, and we'll see in a moment here. It's kind of in the midst of some dry Sahara desert type air, and this is a very impressive wave that has just exited the west coast of Africa, which is right here. This is the west coast of Africa. And both of these systems will, of course, need to be monitored over the next, perhaps potentially the next couple of weeks here for a possible threat to the southern or eastern part of the U.S. Well, here's the aforementioned map of Sahara desert air shown here in orange or yellow. This also from the University of Wisconsin tropical website. All of this represents some dry air that moved westward from northern Africa, the Sahara Desert region of northern Africa, riding along the trade winds, which are typical this time of the year from the east to the west into the tropical Atlantic Ocean. That second system right here, a little bit ragged this morning, and is encountering some of this dry air, but as you recall last week, Erin had the same difficulty, and it put a cap on its intensification until it finally bypassed that dry air. Now, here is Erin again, a larger storm this morning, and it will tend to become even larger over the next 12 to 24 hours or so. No dry air around it right now. It escaped that dry air over the past weekend, and that combined with the fact that it moved over warmer and warmer waters of the southwestern Atlantic allowed an explosion of intensification from a tropical storm to Category 5 in just a matter of hours. And then weakened, by the way, quite rapidly as well after it reached Cat 5 status. Right now, Cat 3, there is some dry air up here along the Mid-Atlantic coastline. That very well may be associated with Canadian wildfire rather than Sahara desert air. But this system right now, probably kind of a cap on any intensification over the next couple of days due to the encounter with that dry air right ahead of it that came off the northern part of Africa into the tropical Atlantic over the past several days. Well, let's take a look at the surface forecast maps from the 0Z run of the GFS. These maps from tropicaltidbits.com. Looking here at the North America view, I thought it'd be more important to take a look at the North American view in this particular scenario here with this hurricane moving out into the open waters of the North Atlantic. Here is Erin as we speak. Again, a little bit difficult to predict its intensity level over the next 24 to 36 hours or so. One factor in favor is less wind shear. One factor against is upwelling underneath its surface. In other words, cooler and cooler water at that sea surface level here. But nonetheless, it could go back to Category 4 over the next couple of days, probably fluctuating between 2, 3, and 4 in terms of its classification. Now, let's move forward here. By the way, the blues on this map, way up here over the Arctic, certainly shows colder air starting to make some inroads here across the polar regions. Snow shown in blue here. And here we go into the latter part of Tuesday and then into the early morning hours on Wednesday. And this is the day, Wednesday is the day where the Outer Banks may have its biggest impact. The closest approach comes maybe late tomorrow into tomorrow night. So probably the strongest winds will take place late tomorrow night in the Outer Banks region, and maybe evacuations later today, spreading up the Outer Banks from where it began yesterday, Hatteras and Ocracoke Islands. 940 millibar hurricane, as depicted here by the 0Z run of the GFS. And some of these models are quite a bit different, with quite a bit deeper central pressure. It's kind of a hard forecast on that, and we'll see how that goes. Here we go. By the time we get to Thursday morning, it's probably at its closest to the Mid-Atlantic coastline at this particular time, but it is also at this particular time on Thursday morning that it will begin its acceleration off to the north and east. And we'll see that here it starts to accelerate off to the north and east, so that by the time we get to the middle part of the upcoming weekend, it is safely out there over the open waters of the North Atlantic. This is the forecast for Sunday morning. Now, again, remember I talked about a cool air influx into the eastern half of the nation. You can see high pressure here, Canadian high pressure, kind of dominating the scene right in this part of North America here on the heels of Erin, which again is moving all off to the north and east out into the North Atlantic by the middle part of the upcoming weekend. Now, let's go out a little bit farther in time and into the kind of the speculation phase with respect to those next tropical systems. Here is the forecast map for next Tuesday or into Wednesday. And this is probably a reflection of that second tropical system that right now is in the midst of that Sahara Desert dry air mass. Whether or not it turns away from the coast or moves into the eastern part of the U.S. way too early to see, it's something we will monitor. I will say this, that there are a couple of factors against this particular system. One is the MJO. We often talk about the Madden-Julian oscillation. While in very favorable position right now for Atlantic Basin tropical activity, it becomes less favorable later this week and into next week. So that is kind of an unfavorable factor for intensification of the system. But it is that time of the year where the sea surface temperatures are very warm. So we move forward here. In this particular model run had it moving off the eastern seaboard. Way too early to speculate on that. Well, it's not too early to speculate, but too early to be certain about that. Then we'll go forward. This is now into the end of next week, and we go into that last part of August here. And I just wanted to show that here we have another tropical system. Potentially, this is the one that is just now exiting off the west coast of Africa. And according to this particular model run, it ends up over the Gulf region here as we begin the month of September. By the way, by this particular time, that MJO may actually rotate back into a more favorable position for tropical activity. So a very busy scene in the Atlantic Basin tropical areas, and it looks like it'll stay active right into the early part, at least the early part of the month of September. That's it for now for ArcfieldWeather.com. This has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.